Well, this is just delightful, I thought, my consciousness fading in and out like a cheap light bulb. The antiseptic reek of the hospital room was doing wonders for my nausea, and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was about as soothing as a jackhammer. But the real kicker? The absolute highlight of my impending demise? My darling family gathered around like vultures, their eyes gleaming with avarice instead of grief. Oh, the irony, I mused, my inner monologue dripping with sarcasm. I spend my life building a financial empire, only to have my loved ones squabble over the spoils like hyenas on a carcass. Bravo, Eleanor, bravo. And then the grand finale, darkness, the big sleep, the ultimate blackout, except not quite. Suddenly, I was bombarded with sensations: the scratchy feel of cheap cotton sheets, the overwhelming scent of baby powder, and the distinct impression that my limbs had shrunk considerably. I cracked open my eyes, and the world swam into focus. Everything was miniature. Oh, this is just fantastic, I muttered, my voice surprisingly high pitched. I'm either hallucinating on my deathbed, or I've been reincarnated as a toddler. Just peachy. I staggered towards the nearest reflective surface, which happened to be a ridiculously oversized teddy bear with a mirrored belly. And there she was, Lily, my granddaughter. All 5 years of her, complete with pigtails and a missing front tooth. You've got to be kidding me, I groaned, my inner voice now a sarcastic 5-year-old. This is not what I had in mind for my afterlife. I was hoping for a penthouse suite in the sky, not a timeout in a toddler's body. But hey, when life, or rather the afterlife, hands you lemons, you make lemonade, or in my case, a potent cocktail of revenge, served with a side of irony. My own funeral was a spectacle to behold. I stood there, hand in hand with my genuinely distraught daughter, while the rest of my family put on an Oscar-worthy performance of faux grief. Their whispers, however, were anything but subtle. Richard's already planning to take over the company. I overheard my dear sister-in-law hiss. The nerve of that man. And Emily's eyeing the yacht, my niece chimed in, her voice dripping with envy. Spoiled brat. They're all a bunch of greedy vultures, my daughter muttered under her breath. Mom would be rolling in her grave. Oh, honey, if you only knew. Mommy, I chirped, my voice a sugary, sweet concoction that would make any Disney princess proud. Why is everyone so grumpy at Grandma's party? My daughter, bless her naive heart, attempted an explanation. They're just a little sad, sweetheart. But Grandma wouldn't want them to be sad, I insisted, my eyes wide with feigned innocence. She'd want them to have fun, right? Of course, Lily, my daughter sighed, but sometimes grown-ups forget how to have fun. Well, I declared, my inner voice cackling with glee, I'm going to remind them. And with that, I set my plan in motion. They thought they were playing a game of inheritance, but they had no idea they were up against the mastermind herself. Back for an encore performance. This time, the game was mine to win. Being 5 again had its perks. No one suspected a thing. They saw pigtails and a missing front tooth. And they assumed adorable. They heard childish questions and assumed innocent. Idiots. I, Eleanor Sinclair, ruthless CEO and now resident of a 5-year-old's body, had a front row seat to their pathetic power plays. Richard, my eldest, was the most obvious. He practically drooled every time he glanced at the portrait of me hanging in the grand hall, the one where I looked particularly imperious, like a queen surveying her dominion. He thought the company was his for the taking. Bless his heart. Emily, my youngest, was more subtle, but no less greedy. Her eyes lingered on the antique jewelry I'd left behind. Her whispers about redecorating the mansion in Monaco were not so subtle. And then there were the others, the spouses, the cousins, the in-laws, each with their own grubby little ambitions. But I had a plan, a glorious, multi-layered scheme, worthy of a Machiavelli. And my first target, Mr. Hawthorne, the family lawyer. A shrewd old bird he was, always had been a bit wary of the Sinclair clan's antics. Perfect. I found him in the library, surrounded by stacks of legal documents. Mr. Hawthorne? I chirped, climbing onto a chair beside him. Can I ask you a question? He peered at me over his spectacles, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. Of course, Lily. What's on your mind? Well, I began, tilting my head thoughtfully. Uncle Richard said something funny the other day. He said that that she didn't really know what she was doing with the company anymore. He said he needed to take over to save it. I paused, feigning innocence. But Grandma was really smart, wasn't she? She built everything herself. Mr. Hawthorne's eyes narrowed. Indeed she did, Lily. Your grandmother was a brilliant businesswoman. So why would Uncle Richard say that? I persisted, my voice a picture of childish confusion. Well, sometimes, Mr. Hawthorne said slowly, people say things they don't really mean, especially when there's a lot of money involved. Duh. I nodded sagely, planting the seed of doubt. That's what Mommy said too, I added for good measure. Over the next few weeks, I became Mr. Hawthorne's shadow. I'd accidentally overhear conversations, misplace documents, and ask seemingly innocent questions that would send his legal mind spinning. I was a master puppeteer, pulling strings from the shadows, watching with glee as my family danced to my tune. And the results were glorious. Mr. Hawthorne, fueled by my subtle prodding and his own suspicions, started digging. He uncovered Richard's hidden debts, his shady offshore accounts, his desperate attempts to inflate the company's profits. He exposed Emily's frivolous spending, her gambling addiction, her mountain of unpaid credit card bills. One by one, the family's dirty laundry was aired, their carefully constructed facades crumbling like stale cookies. Their reputations were tarnished, their power diminished. The vultures were starting to squabble amongst themselves, their unity shattered by suspicion and distrust. And I, the 5-year-old mastermind, sat back and enjoyed the show. This was just the beginning. The real fun was yet to come. My family was starting to get spooked. It was subtle at first. A furrowed brow, a hesitant glance, a nervous clearing of the throat. They couldn't quite put their finger on it, but something about little Lily had changed. Did Lily always talk like that? My sister-in-law whispered to my brother one evening, her eyes darting towards me as I sat innocently playing with my dolls. Like what? He scoffed, dismissing her concern. She's just a kid. I don't know, she insisted, her voice hushed. It's like she knows things she shouldn't know. Oh, I knew things all right. Things they wouldn't believe even if I spelled it out for them. And I wasn't shy about using that knowledge to my advantage. Aunt Clara, I chirped, my voice sweet as honey. Why did you sell Grandma's necklace, the one with the big blue diamond? Clara's face paled. What necklace, dear? She stammered, her eyes darting nervously towards my brother. The one you said was too gaudy for Grandma, I continued, my smile widening. The one you said you'd take care of after she was gone. The silence that followed was thick with tension. My brother's eyes narrowed, suspicion clouding his features. Clara, flustered and speechless, excused herself from the table. Another seed planted, another crack in their fragile facade. My innocent questions became a source of constant unease. I'd inquire about Uncle George's offshore accounts, Aunt Mildred's gambling debts, Cousin Henry's failed business ventures. Each question, delivered with wide-eyed curiosity, chipped away at their composure, exposing their vulnerabilities. But my manipulations weren't limited to family gatherings. I had discovered the joys of anonymous emails and leaked documents, a carefully worded tip to a gossip columnist here, a confidential financial report slipped to a rival company there. It was all too easy to fan the flames of scandal that were already engulfing my family. The media had a field day. Headlines screamed about the Sinclair family's downfall, their dirty secrets exposed for all the world to see. Richard's fraudulent investments, Emily's extravagant spending, the web of deceit and betrayal that had been woven over decades. It was all laid bare, a testament to their greed and corruption. I watched it all unfold with a detached amusement, like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of chaos. Their empire was crumbling, their reputations tarnished, their power waning. And I, the 5-year-old puppet master, was pulling the strings. But amidst the chaos, I didn't forget those who had remained loyal. My daughter, bless her kind heart, had always been a source of comfort and support. I ensured she was well taken care of, her financial future secure. And there were others, old friends, trusted advisors, loyal employees, who had been cast aside by my greedy family. I reached out to them, offering support, guidance, and the promise of a return to power. They were surprised, even suspicious at first. But my words, my insights, my uncanny resemblance to their former leader convinced them that I was more than just a child. I was the heir apparent, the rightful successor to the Sinclair throne. And together, we would reclaim what was rightfully mine. The boardroom was a sterile, imposing space, all polished mahogany and leather chairs. I sat beside my mother, perched on a stack of cushions, like a miniature queen on her throne. The executives, mostly old men with receding hairlines and expensive suits, barely acknowledged my presence. A harmless child, they assumed. A cute distraction, if only they knew. Now, about the quarterly projections, the CEO, a nervous man named Mr. Thompson, began, his voice trembling slightly. Mr. Thompson, I interrupted, my voice clear and confident, why are we focusing on the Asian market when the real opportunity lies in South America? The room fell silent. Mr. Thompson blinked, his jaw slack. Lily, my mother hissed, don't interrupt. But Mommy, I insisted, tilting my head innocently. Grandma always said that South America was the future. She said they had a growing middle class, a thirst for luxury goods, and a lack of competition. Mr. Thompson's eyes widened. Well, that's very insightful, Lily, he stammered, clearly flustered. It's true, I continued, pressing my advantage. And besides, Uncle Richard's investments in Asia are failing. He's losing us money. A collective gasp filled the room. Richard, his face flushed with anger, glared at me. You little brat. Richard, my mother snapped, silencing him with a glare. Don't speak to your niece like that. The meeting continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. My innocent comments had planted seeds of doubt, exposed weaknesses, and challenged the status quo. The board members, initially dismissive, now looked at me with a newfound respect. Or perhaps it was fear. Either way, I had their attention. After the meeting, Mr. Thompson approached me, his expression a mixture of awe and bewilderment. Lily, he whispered, you remind me so much of your grandmother. The way you speak, the way you think. It's uncanny. I smiled sweetly, my inner voice cackling with delight. Grandma was very smart, I said. She taught me a lot. From that day on, I became Mr. Thompson's unofficial advisor. I'd whisper strategies in his ear, suggest alternative solutions, and point out potential pitfalls. He was a puppet, and I was the master puppeteer, guiding him, manipulating him, steering the company back towards its former glory. The frustration was immense, though. These men, these incompetent fools, were squandering my legacy, my life's work. They lacked the vision, the ruthlessness, the sheer audacity that had made Sinclair Enterprises a global powerhouse. I yearned to take the reins myself, to reclaim my rightful place at the helm, but I was trapped in this childish facade, forced to play the long game, to manipulate from the sidelines. Patience, Eleanor, patience. The time would come, but for now, I had to be content with whispering in the ears of those in power, subtly influencing decisions, steering the ship back on course. The Sinclair Empire was mine to reclaim, and I wouldn't rest until it was back where it belonged. My network was more valuable than any trust fund. Over the years, I hadn't just built a company. I'd cultivated relationships, sharp minds, loyal hearts, people who understood the ruthlessness it took to climb to the top and stay there. They had been sidelined after my death, their expertise dismissed by my short-sighted family. Fools. My first call was to Margaret, my former VP of marketing. Margaret, darling, I said, my voice a playful purr that belied the steely intent behind it. It's Lily. We need to talk. Margaret, bless her loyal soul, was hesitant at first. Lily, is everything all right? Shouldn't you be in school? School's for amateurs, I scoffed. We have bigger fish to fry, Margaret. Sinclair Enterprises is floundering, and those imbeciles on the board are about to run it into the ground. But what can you do, Lily? She asked, her voice laced with concern. You're just a child. But that's where you're wrong, darling, I purred. I have a plan, and I need your help. I laid out my strategy, reminding her of the old days, the victories we'd shared, the enemies we'd vanquished. I promised her a return to power, a chance to rebuild what had been lost. And most importantly, I appealed to her loyalty. to the bond we had forged in the trenches of the corporate battlefield. Eleanor always trusted you, Margaret, I said, my voice softening. She knew you had the brains and the guts to make the tough decisions. Don't let her down. Margaret, bless her sentimental heart, was hooked. And she wasn't the only one. One by one, I reconnected with my old guard, the finance whiz, the legal eagle, the PR guru, each of them eager to reclaim their former glory. With their support, I began to dismantle the power structures that my family had so carelessly erected. A whispered suggestion here, a leaked document there, a carefully orchestrated boardroom coup. It was all too easy to outmaneuver those who underestimated me. They thought they were in control, but they were merely puppets dancing to my tune. The satisfaction was immense. Watching Richard squirm as his allies abandoned him, seeing Emily's face contort with rage as her spending was curtailed, hearing the whispers of doubt and fear echoing through the once imposing halls of Sinclair Enterprises, it was a symphony of sweet revenge. But the ultimate prize, the final showdown, was yet to come. Richard, my treacherous son, was still a formidable opponent. He had underestimated me, yes, but he was cunning, ruthless, and desperate to cling to the power he believed was rightfully his. I knew I had to be careful. One wrong move, one slip-up, and he could expose me, ruin everything I had worked for. But I was ready. I had spent years studying him, learning his weaknesses, anticipating his moves. And now the time had come to strike. I gathered my allies, my inner circle of trusted advisors. We strategized, planned, and prepared for the final battle. The stakes were high, the risks immense, but the reward, reclaiming my empire, securing my legacy, and ensuring that justice was served, was worth it. The stage was set, the players in position. The final act was about to begin, and I, Eleanor Sinclair, reborn as Lily, the 5-year-old mastermind, was ready to take center stage. Richard, the snake in my nest, finally slithered out into the open. He'd always been ambitious, hungry for power, but I'd foolishly believed in his loyalty, in the bond of blood. Another mistake to add to the growing list. He called a special board meeting, his summons dripping with faux urgency. I watched him from my usual perch beside my mother, my face a picture of childish innocence. He didn't even spare me a glance. Just another pawn on his chessboard, he assumed. Oh, how wrong he was. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice oozing with false charm. We stand at a crossroads. Sinclair Enterprises, our beloved company, is facing unprecedented challenges. He launched into a dramatic presentation, filled with charts and graphs that screamed decline. He blamed the recent scandals, the market volatility, the incompetence of the current leadership, conveniently forgetting his own role in the company's misfortunes. We need a change, he declared, his voice rising with conviction, a bold, decisive leader who can steer us back to profitability, and I believe I am that leader. He outlined his plan, a radical restructuring, a streamlining of operations, and most importantly, a sell-off of the company's most valuable assets. He painted a rosy picture of increased shareholder value, lucrative payouts, and a bright future under his leadership. But I saw through his lies. He wasn't interested in saving the company. He was interested in lining his own pockets. Anyone who opposes me, he hissed, his eyes glinting with menace, will be seen as an enemy of progress, an obstacle to our collective success. The board members, a bunch of spineless yes-men, nodded in agreement. They were easily swayed by his promises of wealth and power, blind to the long-term consequences of his actions. And what about you, Lily? Richard sneered, finally acknowledging my presence. Do you have any objections to your uncle's brilliant plan? I tilted my head, my eyes wide with feigned confusion. But Uncle Richard, I chirped, won't selling off the company make us poor? A ripple of laughter filled the room. Richard smirked, patting my head condescendingly. Don't worry your little head about such matters, sweetheart. Uncle Richard knows what's best. Oh, I knew what he was doing. He was planning to dismantle the company, sell off its assets, and disappear with the profits, leaving his siblings and their families with nothing. He was a parasite, feeding off the legacy that I had built, the empire that I had bled for. Fury coursed through me, a burning rage that threatened to consume me. But I couldn't let it show. Not yet. I had to play the long game, the waiting game. I had to let him believe he had won. Let him expose his true colors. Let him dig his own grave. And so I smiled sweetly, my eyes glinting with a secret knowledge that he couldn't comprehend. Okay, Uncle Richard, I said, my voice a picture of childish obedience. I trust you. He chuckled, dismissing me as a harmless child. He had no idea that the trap was set, the bait laid, the net ready to spring. He was walking into my web, and I, the spider, was waiting patiently for him to become entangled. 5-year-olds are underestimated. They have sticky fingers, curious minds, and a knack for finding things that adults try to hide. Like, for instance, the key to Richard's private study. It was dangling from his keychain, carelessly left on the hallway table, a simple matter of borrowing it while he was busy yelling at the gardener. Inside the study, it was like Christmas morning for a budding corporate saboteur. Files upon files of incriminating documents, shady deals, forged signatures, offshore accounts with ridiculously large sums attached. Richard wasn't just greedy, he was sloppy, amateur. Mr. Hawthorne, bless his meticulous soul, was thrilled with my findings. We spent hours poring over the evidence, piecing together the puzzle of Richard's deceit. He was impressed, even a little awed by my grasp of financial intricacies. Lily, he said one day, his voice hushed with wonder, you have your grandmother's mind. If only he knew. The next board meeting was packed. Shareholders, investors, even a few nosy reporters. They were all there, eager to witness the fate of Sinclair Enterprises. Richard, oblivious to the impending doom, strutted around like a peacock, his smug grin making my stomach churn. Now that we've agreed on the restructuring plan, he announced, his voice dripping with self-satisfaction, we can move forward with— Not so fast, Uncle Richard, I interrupted, my voice cutting through the room like a shard of glass. All eyes turned to me. Richard's smile faltered, replaced by a look of annoyance. Lily, what is the meaning of this? I think you have some explaining to do, I said, my voice deceptively sweet. I held up a folder, its contents neatly labeled. These documents seem to suggest that you've been, how do you say, mismanaging company funds. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Richard's face turned a delightful shade of purple. Where did you get those? He sputtered, his voice laced with panic. Oh, you know, I said with a shrug. 5-year-olds get into all sorts of places, especially when they're looking for their crayons. I handed the folder to Mr. Hawthorne, who proceeded to lay out the evidence with the precision of a surgeon. Shady deals, hidden accounts, blatant fraud. It was all there, in black and white, for everyone to see. The board members, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust, turned on Richard like a pack of wolves. His carefully constructed facade crumbled, his power evaporated, his reputation shattered. He was stripped of his position, his shares frozen, his name dragged through the mud by the eager press. The fallout was swift and brutal. His wife, the social climber who had married him for his wealth and status, filed for divorce. His children, ashamed and embarrassed, refused to speak to him. He was left with nothing but the bitter taste of defeat and the crushing weight of his own greed. Justice, I thought, savoring the moment. Sweet, delicious justice. But even as I reveled in Richard's downfall, a flicker of sadness lingered in my heart. He was my son, after all. And despite his flaws, his betrayal, I couldn't help but feel a pang of something. Regret? Pity? Perhaps? But there was no turning back now. The wheel of fate had been set in motion, and Richard had reaped what he had sown. The boardroom was a scene of utter chaos. Richard's ousting had left a gaping hole in the leadership, and the sharks were circling. Shareholders were threatening lawsuits, investors were pulling out, and the stock price was plummeting faster than a meteor. It was a disaster of epic proportions. We need a solution, and we need it now! One board member shrieked, his face the color of curdled milk. But who will lead us? Another wailed, wringing his hands. We're doomed! Excuse me, I piped up, my voice cutting through the hysteria. I think I have an idea. All eyes turned to me, their expressions ranging from disbelief to desperation. I, the 5-year-old oracle, had their attention. Time to put on a show. Mommy, I said, tugging on my mother's sleeve, tell them what Grandma used to say about diversification, and about strategic partnerships, and about that thing with the The whatchamacallit. My mother, bless her quick wit, caught on immediately. She stepped forward, her voice calm and confident. Gentlemen, she began, I believe Lily is referring to our portfolio diversification strategy, as well as the potential for strategic partnerships in emerging markets. And of course, the, she paused, glancing at me with a playful wink, the vertical integration model that Eleanor always championed. The board members, their initial skepticism melting away, leaned in with renewed interest. My mother, channeling her inner Eleanor, outlined a plan for recovery, a strategy that was both bold and innovative. She spoke of expanding into new markets, forging alliances with key players, and streamlining operations for maximum efficiency. It was a masterclass in business acumen, and I, the mastermind behind it all, sat back and enjoyed the performance. By the end of the meeting, the atmosphere had shifted from panic to cautious optimism. The board members, impressed by my mother's, or rather my, vision and expertise, voted unanimously to implement the new strategy. The shareholders, reassured by the promise of a turnaround, held off on their lawsuits. And the stock price, responding to the renewed confidence, began a slow but steady climb. The Sinclair empire was on the mend, its wings clipped, but its spirit unbroken. And I, the 5-year-old phoenix, had risen from the ashes of my family's greed, guiding them back towards the light. The pride was immense, a deep satisfaction that warmed me from the inside out. I had reclaimed my legacy, protected my empire, and outsmarted those who had sought to destroy it. But the battle wasn't over yet. There was still one more move to make, one final act to ensure the future of Sinclair Enterprises. Mommy? I whispered, snuggling into her side as we left the boardroom. I think it's time you became the new CEO. My mother, startled but intrigued, looked at me with a questioning gaze. Lily, are you sure? Trust me, Mommy, I said, my voice firm. I know what Grandma would have wanted. And with that, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. My mother, the kindest, most compassionate of my children, the one who had always put family first, would lead the company into a new era. She would be the face of Sinclair Enterprises, the embodiment of its values, the guardian of its legacy. And I, the silent puppet master, would be there to guide her, to support her, to ensure that the empire remained in safe hands. Time, it seemed, was a different beast inside a child's body. The years stretched and contracted, a rubber band of anticipation and accomplishment. I watched my reflection change. The pudgy cheeks thinned, the missing teeth reappeared. The childish wonder in my eyes slowly hardened into the steely glint of Eleanor Sinclair. My mother, now CEO of Sinclair Enterprises, blossomed under my guidance. She had always been intelligent, compassionate, but now, with the confidence I instilled in her, she was a force to be reckoned with. The company thrived, its profits soaring, its reputation restored. And I, the silent power behind the throne, reveled in her success. Lily, you're so much like your grandmother, I overheard a board member say one day, his voice a mixture of awe and bewilderment. It's almost eerie. Grandma had a lot of wisdom to share, I replied with a knowing smile, my voice echoing with the familiar cadence of Eleanor Sinclair. I guess some of it rubbed off on me. The whispers followed me wherever I went. She's a prodigy, they'd say, a chip off the old block. The future of Sinclair Enterprises. I played along, cultivating the mystique, enjoying the subtle power it afforded me. My influence extended beyond the boardroom. I became a sought-after advisor, a confidant to politicians, celebrities, and business leaders. My insights were sharp, my instincts impeccable, my advice worth its weight in gold. I was a legend in the making, a force to be reckoned with, and I hadn't even reached my teenage years. But the true satisfaction came from watching my family heal. The greed, the envy, the petty squabbles, they had faded, replaced by a newfound respect, a sense of unity that had been absent for far too long. They gathered for holidays, celebrated birthdays, and supported each other through thick and thin. It wasn't perfect, but it was family. And as I observed them, a sense of contentment settled over me. Eleanor Sinclair, the ruthless businesswoman, the lonely matriarch, had finally found peace. Her legacy was secure, her empire thriving, her family united. She had achieved a form of immortality, her spirit living on through me, her granddaughter, her heir apparent. I embraced this new life, this new identity. Lily Sinclair was more than just a vessel for Eleanor's soul. She was a unique individual, a force in her own right. I had the memories, the experiences, the wisdom of a lifetime, but I also had the energy, the passion, the potential of a young life just beginning. The future stretched before me, a vast canvas of possibilities. I would continue to guide the company, to mentor my mother, to protect my family, but I would also forge my own path, explore my own passions, leave my own mark on the world. Eleanor Sinclair might be gone, but her spirit lived on, stronger than ever, in the heart of the girl who had become her legacy. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. The ballroom glittered like a treasure chest, filled with the city's elite, the kind of people who air kiss and discuss stock options with equal enthusiasm. I glided through the crowd, a vision in crimson silk, my smile as sharp as the diamond earrings dangling from my lobes. No longer the child prodigy, I was now a woman in her prime, the heir apparent to the Sinclair empire, and the most sought-after woman in the room. "Lily, darling, you simply radiate power," a socialite gushed, her eyes wide with admiration. "You remind me of someone. Eleanor, was it? Your grandmother?" "People do say I have her eyes," I purred, my voice a blend of honey and steel, "and perhaps a touch of her determination." An elderly gentleman, his face etched with the wisdom of 1,000 board meetings, approached me with a hesitant smile. "Lily, my dear," he began, his voice a raspy whisper, "you wouldn't believe who you remind me of. It's uncanny, really. The way you carry yourself, the way you command a room. It's like Eleanor Sinclair never left." I met his gaze, a playful glint in my eyes. "Perhaps she hasn't," I murmured, my voice barely audible above the strains of the orchestra. He chuckled, assuming I was being coy. You young people and your cryptic pronouncements," he said, shaking his head. "But seriously, Lily, you have her spirit. The same fire, the same ambition, the same ruthlessness." "Ruthless?" I echoed, feigning surprise. "Why, whatever do you mean?" He winked, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Don't play innocent with me, my dear. I knew Eleanor Sinclair for decades. And I see her in you, the same spark, the same hunger." "Hunger?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "I'm merely ambitious, Mr. Caldwell, just like my grandmother." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Ambitious, yes, but also something more. Something unyielding. It's as if she's living through you, guiding your every move." I smiled enigmatically, leaving him to ponder the mystery. He wasn't entirely wrong, of course, but the truth was far more complex, far more delicious. I surveyed the room, a sea of faces, each one a testament to my influence, my power, my legacy. The politicians, the businessmen, the socialites, they all danced to my tune, their fates intertwined with mine. I had achieved everything I set out to do. My empire was secure, my family united, my enemies vanquished, and I, the Empress reborn, stood at the pinnacle of my power. A wave of contentment washed over me, a deep satisfaction that transcended any material possession or social status. I had been given a second chance, a rare opportunity to rewrite my story, to correct my mistakes, to protect what I had built. And I had seized it with both hands, with the ruthlessness and cunning that had defined my life, and now, my afterlife. I raised my champagne flute, the bubbles shimmering like 1,000 tiny stars. A silent toast to Eleanor Sinclair, the woman who had clawed her way to the top, only to be betrayed by those she loved. To Lily Sinclair, the girl who had inherited her grandmother's legacy, her ambition, her indomitable spirit. To the Empress in bloom, the woman who had risen from the ashes of her past, stronger, wiser, and more powerful than ever before. This was my victory, my triumph, my redemption. And as I surveyed the glittering ballroom, the city lights twinkling in the distance, I knew that my reign had just begun.